Today, you graduate from one of the world's great universities and with a degree from one of the premier political science departments in the country. This represents a tremendous achievement. You've worked hard to get here, and it wasn't always easy along the way. Majoring in political science, you've learned about the complexities of social, economic, and political systems around the world. You've honed your analytical skills in confronting and constructing arguments and examining them critically. You've developed a toolkit that allows you to bring systematic data to bear on important questions confronting societies around the globe. You have wrestled with the connections between our normative commitments and values and the manner in which social systems operate. In the time you've spent at Duke, you've also become young adults, ready to face the world whether you or your parents quite believe it. We're tremendously proud of you. Every year at this graduation ceremony, the Department of Political Science recognizes an outstanding alumnus of our program. Past winners of our Distinguished Alumni Award include Judy Woodruff, Adam Silver, Pamela Hawley, Jay Billis, and Amy Gravitt. Like past honorees, this year's recipient not only reflects the values of Duke University, his career is also an inspiration to those who major in political science. After graduating from Duke, he went on to receive a law degree from Columbia University. Dan Abrams has become one of our country's premier legal and political analysts. I won't talk about all of his accomplishments here, since they couldn't be listed in the time we have available. Suffice it to say that, among other things, he's the Chief Legal Affairs Correspondent for ABC News and the host of the top-rated cable series Live PD. He's also the CEO and founder of the Abrams Media Group and has his own SiriusXM radio show. Somehow, he also finds time to write. His next book, which will deal with Teddy Roosevelt and Teddy Roosevelt's legal defense in a libel suit, will be coming out next week. You can pre-order it on Amazon right now. We are proud to call Dan Abrams an alumnus of our program, and would you please help me welcome him to our ceremony?
Thank you very much. I thought the deal was you were going to promote the book twice before I. It's a real honor and pleasure to be back here at Duke. My memories of Duke are such fond ones. And when I look back at my time, in particular at my major at Duke in political science, I thought a lot about this and said to myself, it doesn't really seem like a science. Right, it's I guess erecting models to predict the future, et cetera. But typically, the way that we view science, it's not really the kind of science that the rest of us typically view. And so I often look back wondering, what exactly does a political science degree prepare one for? Is it a job in government, a position as a professor, running for political office, maybe a job in the law? People sometimes joke about the breadth and ambiguity of a political science degree. And yet I believe that a political science, government, whatever you want to call it, degree is more important than ever today. Understanding not just how our system of government works, but why, is critical in ensuring people retain faith in a system that is being tested like never before. And that's the world I live in. I live in the world of trying to explain to people what the heck is going on. And from congressional subpoenas to checks and balances to challenges to voting districts, no matter what you think about what is happening, understanding why the system exists the way it does is critical for all of us to maintain a better appreciation for it. Just saying, well, they're co-equal branches of government doesn't mean much without a more in-depth understanding. After all, co-equal doesn't mean that the president has to do everything Congress demands or hand over everything, nor does it mean that he can reject all requests. But I'm not just talking about the rules, but understanding why they exist. How did they come to be? What was the real understanding about how it would and should work when the rules were enacted? And beyond politics and what might sound like sort of preachy, esoteric political principles, thinking about our government and how it works can help us think, I think, about how other types of businesses beyond government ought to run, what the priorities should be, how the leaders should work with one another, how to avoid bad decision-making or mistakes by having numerous safety nets, what leaders should do to retain the trust of subordinates. The nation's founders created a republic with lessons for every type of business. You know, one of the most memorable or lasting courses that I took at Duke was one about comparative international politics. It was critical to my understanding of the world and in recognizing similarities and differences in other governmental political systems, but it just expanded me as a person to think about how so many others not here thought about the more limited questions that arise here every day. And that course ends up coming up for me in life. And so I guess my point is I think that the value of a political science degree can be vastly underestimated, just not by me. As I was preparing for today, I was reminded of Professor James David Barber, who at the time I was here at Duke was one of the most celebrated political science professors. I took about any class that he taught back at the time. And he was best known for his book called Presidential Character, which basically assessed the qualities of each president from Taft to Nixon and evaluated how their personalities helped predict their success or failure as a president. His first baseline in defining presidential types was activity or passivity. How much energy does the person invest in the presidency? The second baseline was positive or negative, meaning how does he feel about what he's doing? Does he seem to be happy, having fun in the position? And so you end up, according to Professor Barber, with these four categories: either active positive, passive positive, active negative, passive negative. And the traits of an active positive president included a readiness to act, optimism, fondness for the presidency, and he gave examples of people like Franklin Roosevelt, Harry Truman, John Kennedy, and he thought Gerald Ford as well. The traits of a passive positive included low self-esteem, compensated by an ingratiating personality, superficially optimistic, a desire to please. He put William Howard Taft and Warren Harding in that. An active negative president included a lack of deriving joy after expending much effort on tasks, aggressive, highly rigid, having a general view of power as a means to self-realization. He included Woodrow Wilson, Hoover, Nixon in that. And then finally, a passive negative, a strong sense of a duty, desire to avoid power, low self-esteem. He included Calvin Coolidge in that one. So his summary is that active positive presidents want most to achieve results. Active negatives aim to get and keep power and are the most dangerous. Passive positives are after love. Passive negatives emphasize their civic virtues. All right, I bring this up here not to make judgments about presidents today, but rather to say that I think those categories can be useful to think about in life. His philosophy works for most leadership roles any of you may take on. We want people who are both active and confident and love what they're doing as leaders. They are the best leaders and the ones I hope all of you can be. So if you don't really want to be president with the civic responsibility it entails, don't run for president. If you don't want to be a lawyer or maybe a legislator, I would say don't go to law school. The degree is nice to have, but there are a lot of things you could be doing with that time and money. If you don't want to be in finance, don't go down that path. If you don't want to be a rock star or professional athlete, well, those are pretty cool for anyone. But my point is that you won't be as good at it if you don't like it or love it. Try to pursue a career not because you should or you can, but because you will be a, quote, positive in it. And that applies just as much to being midway through a career as when starting it. Although it's a lot harder to shift gears at that point, but I've seen people who went from active positive to active negative who should have gotten out. You will have a political science degree from Duke. You will have options. Probably the best way to provide context for me in sort of life is to look back at history. No situation is completely new or unforeseen. I've written these books now on Lincoln and Roosevelt, and it is useful to look at how these great men dealt with adversity. They were very different, but both were unrelenting in their desire to do what was right in a larger sense. But Lincoln became far more depressed in his early years as president. Then again, he was dealing with a civil war. Roosevelt thrived, loved the fight and the adversity, but both figured out ways to overcome in their own way, very different ways with very different personalities. And part of my passion for these books and working on them has been that both were about trials that were somehow forgotten and the lessons from each seemingly lost to history. In the Roosevelt book, which comes out next week, the accusations there that Roosevelt gets sued in this case, the former president of the United States testifying for 8 days in his own defense. But the accusations were similar to the ones we hear today. Political corruption in politics, money, the same issues we're dealing with. The point is that there are broad life lessons in history that extend well beyond the event itself. And so when life's adversity hits you, stay in touch with the people who've lived a little history. Your parents, your mentors, your professors. History may have some reassuring answers. Theodore Roosevelt used to always look back and ask himself, what would Lincoln have done? Good luck to all of you. Armed with a Duke degree, you have options that few others have. Don't underestimate that or your ability to use that degree to achieve great things in different fields. Congratulations. Thank you for having me.